Nutrition is the fourth element of triathlon, and even more so when it comes to Ironman. We have loads of information on how to train for the swim, the bike and the run, but how do we go about optimizing our fueling strategy when we're racing over this distance? Well, today we're going to be speaking to a sports scientist who's got a lot of stats on actually how we need to break that down, on what we should be aiming for and how we actually come to that throughout the race. Plus, we're going to be getting a sneak peek at a pro's fueling strategy as we are here in Nice ahead of the men's Ironman World Championships, and how he's managed to move up to reach such high targets. It's hot out here in Nice, and you might be wondering why we're not talking about hydration. Obviously, that's a very important element of nutrition, and if it's something you haven't yet worked out, you need to get that dialed in first. However, it is quite bespoke. So today, we're looking more at the trends of the increased intake of carbohydrates, something that the pros have been working on for many years. I mean, it used to be thought of as good to be taking on an average of 60 grams of carbs per hour, then it went up to 90, and now we see some pros reaching the heights of around 120 grams of carbohydrates per hour. But how does that translate to us as age groupers? I mean, you have to consider obviously that during the swim you can't be taking on any carbs. You do have the bike, and that's probably the time when you can really up that number, but then the run has its own challenges, both logistically and obviously with physical elements of it. Now, obviously myself, Mark and James don't exactly regularly race over long distance triathlons, nor do we practice the nutrition for that. So we can speak from our knowledge, just not our experience. Therefore, I'm going to be tapping into our partners at Precision Fuel and Hydration and speaking to Emily, their sports scientist, who has collated a lot of data from 70 different case studies to give us a little bit of a breakdown. I'm intrigued to see what Emily's got to say. Okay, well, Emily, thanks for joining us. I know that you have been crunching a lot of numbers on this study, and we've got some reference here. But first up, can you just sort of talk us through who the study is and what the breakdown of those people?
Yeah, definitely. So we have this massive database of 300 case studies of all different sports, but specifically for triathlon, we have a lot of 70.3 and full distance. We have 70 full distance case studies, and that is a mix of pros and amateurs, but that's also a mix of male and females. It's quite an even split. So we have, I think it's 38 males and 32 females. Pros, it's 40 pros and 30 amateurs, but quite top level amateurs, quite kind of good results from them in those races. And what we do is after the race, we have a sit down with them, we have a chat, and we analyse exactly what they did, what they took in the morning, what they ate and what they drank, on the bike, on the run, just pre-race. And I take that away, crunch all the numbers of all the carbs, the sodium and fluid. And then we've got this massive database of all of these that we can draw lots of kind of trends and data points from.
Cool. Now, I mean, today I know you guys are fuel and hydration, but we're concentrating on fuel because, I mean, I think hydration is more personalised. So, if you can kind of go with the top line numbers of the carbs for the 70 athletes.
Yeah, definitely. So, out of all of them, we've taken the average carbs over the whole race. So that includes the time of the swim, the bike and the run when we're talking about per hour, which is 80 grams per hour for the 70, which is quite high because that's including the swim time. That does include if they've had a final kind of pre-race gel or chew as well. But that's 80 grams per hour. That's going to be different if we looked at just the bike or run time, but overall quite high.
We'll get to that in a moment. So you just mentioned that's including the pre. So like, how does the breakdown actually look? As I know we're obviously talking about an average here, but how does that breakdown look? Obviously you've got nothing in the swim, but you've got pre, you've got bike and you've got run. What's the breakdown looking like?
Yeah, so I can talk about it. It's often, the bike is often front loading, so people will go higher for carbohydrate on the bike and it will drop down on the run. Because of the mechanics of running, it's harder to take so much in and be able to absorb that. So the athletes these days are going kind of over 90 grams per hour on the bike. The average is 96 grams per hour, and then they'll drop down on the run, and the average is 73 grams per hour, which is a 24% drop off. So not crazy high compared to our 70.3 case studies that have a bigger drop off, because it's obviously a shorter run at the end. These guys are running a marathon, so they're still hitting kind of over 70 grams per hour. Yeah,
okay. And how would that, I mean, that does sound a lot, probably to a lot of people who are watching this, like over that length of time, especially if you're doing maybe a longer Ironman. You know, I know your case study, the average is about 9.5 hours, but if you were sort of up to 12 to 15 hours, that is a lot to kind of get your head around. How would you maybe suggest the breakdown of that, like with different products, whether that's drink mix, whether that's gels, whether that's chews, like I know you don't have those numbers, but maybe what would you suggest as a sort of very rough outline?
Yeah, it's very personal and it depends on the event. For someone going longer and at different intensities, the kind of carb targets are different. But for a full distance Ironman, we kind of have seen trends in how people are starting to hit the numbers. I'd say, obviously it depends on your bike setup and your bottles and the size of your bottles and everything like that. We've seen lots of people using a large volume of gels and a large volume of drink mix, either or, to kind of get a good amount of fuel with them, but they'll separate that. So if they've got multiple bottles, one will be solely fuel and a lot of fuel to be kind of self-sufficient a little bit, and then another bottle will be kind of hydration, so they use electrolyte tabs kind of specific to their losses, and that's kind of what they do on the bike. And then on the run, using gels throughout, they'll pick up gels, kind of aim for what, it depends on obviously the length of the run, you're right. If it is going to be longer, then someone who's going at a lower intensity for longer might go for 60. Someone like Leon might go for 90 on the run, so it does depend, but they'll just often pick up gels in T2, run with them, use either bigger 90 gels, 30 gels throughout really.
Okay, and this number is obviously really quite big for a lot of people, but we still see pros, tapping potentially close to 120. Are you suggesting then from this case study that like 80 could be a good number for people to kind of aim for when they're sort of on their way up through the carb kind of numbers?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Definitely, I'd say 80 overall is a large amount really. That's obviously over 100 on the bike and kind of over 60 on the run. So if you're going for a goal, it will start off probably lower than that and you'll want to kind of train your gut to be able to hit more. The more the better, as long as you can kind of tolerate it. So you've got to do that gut training. And it might look like 90 grams per hour on the bike, aiming for, and then 60 on the run to have that drop down. And then overall average, that's going to be kind of 75, 80, if you consider the swim time and everything as well.
Well, thanks to Emily for all of those stats, and it can be a bit daunting. That is a lot of carbs, and obviously a lot of people will be slower than that average of 9.5 hours, and therefore you're going to be still having to take that amount for many more hours. But if you do want a little bit of inspiration or finding some examples that maybe relate to yourself, well, on their website for Precision Fuel and Hydration, they've actually got case studies of different distances, different athletes of different ages, and all at different paces of when it's actually really worked for them. So I would suggest going to check that out, just to give you a little bit more of an idea. And we'll share the link in the description beneath this video. And I know personally, I couldn't go out tomorrow and consume that amount of carbohydrates, even if I could manage to do an Ironman. For the pros, it has taken them years and years of training up to that. And a really good example is Leon Chevalier. Actually, just in the beginning of 2021, so only a couple of years ago, he averaged 79 grams of carbs per hour for his Ironman. And then just recently this year, he's managed an average of 108. In fact, Leon's fueling strategy for the Ironman World Champs was a 30-gram caffeine gel around half an hour before the swim, and then aiming for a whopping 120 grams of carbs per hour for the bike, followed with 100 grams of carbs per hour on the run. Now, I'm not suggesting that we try and replicate this, and we have to remember that Leon spent a very long time building up to reach this number, plus the fact that he works, obviously races at very high intensity, but also trains a lot and therefore eats a lot every day. So his gut is trained to that. We can't suddenly go and mimic it. However, there is one element of his nutrition strategy that we could potentially learn from and mimic, and that is his caffeine intake. Leon might well stop for a coffee on a training ride, but that will be where that ends. However, that is not where your caffeine consumption or his caffeine consumption needs to end. Thanks to gels, we can now top up on the go. And in fact, from the case study that Emily talked about earlier, the average caffeine consumption for those 70 athletes was quite a significant 397 milligrams of caffeine. So that's almost 4 caffeine gels throughout the race. Now, you need to note here that actually the recommended amount is 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilo of body weight. So you need to do a little bit of maths to work out what you want to be aiming towards. But also bear in mind that you might want to be closer to that 6 milligram target if you're doing a longer distance race, or closer to the 3 milligram target per kilo of body weight if you're doing a short distance race. Plus, obviously, bear in mind how much caffeine you take in normally. If you don't do any caffeine and suddenly do it on race day, you're going to have a bit of a shock. So make sure that you practice with it, but also obviously bear in mind with how your body reacts to that. And someone who does use caffeine is Leon, and on a race day he aims to take between 400 to 500 milligrams of caffeine. So that would be between 4 or 5 of these gels. So on race day, Leon's plan is to take his caffeine gel with 30 grams of carbs about 30 minutes before the swim starts. And even if you're not doing caffeine at this point, it's a really good idea to top up your carb levels, because you're probably not going to be able to get any more carbs in for at least an hour, obviously, whilst you're swimming. And then onto the bike, hopefully you've worked out your carb intake or your target, or at least you're now going to go away and do that. but you want to think strategically about how you're going to use caffeine if you are. Leon, for example, on this course, he plans to take 2 caffeine gels on the bike. The first one midway up the climb if the pace allows him, and the second one just before the descent. So that brings us to here, the run. You've still got to work out your pacing, both for your running, but most importantly, your nutrition. And we're going to use Leon again as an example. So he's planning on taking 2 caffeine gels on the run, the first one within that first third, and the second one after that. Well, that is a lot to take in, both literally and physically. And I really like the fact that we've got those stats of age groupers, yes, at the elite end, but it just gives a slightly more realistic picture, as obviously Leon is at the very top end, and then we've got age groupers who are working their way up. And I think having something around 80 grams of carbs per hour as an average to target is a really good number. You need to look at where you are right now and maybe make a strategy to try and reach towards that. Well, we would love to hear where you are on that journey, how many carbs you managed to take in on an Ironman. You can do that in the comments section below. Big thanks to Precision Control and Hydration for their help with this, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed it too. Give us a like if so.